Today's guest on the winning teams is Kurt Uhlir. Now, Kurt has got a very interesting background. He's kind of what I would call is kind of a serial entrepreneur, but not necessarily that he starts his own businesses, although he does talk about that, the experience of doing that during the interview. But he is a great person to actually bring in to, if you want to scale. So if you want to 10x or 100x your business, Kurt is the person who comes in. He's got a very interesting background, his technology background, really deep in marketing as well. So he's got a lot of experience working in different companies, different industries, and across different continents. So kind of got a depth of experience, but very much got the reputation of being the king of scaling businesses. And he talks about how he does that and what he's looking for in that. Where we lean into, because I said there are many different avenues we could go down with Kurt because of his background and the work that he has done. But the one that we lean into is, you know, his passion and his really strong belief about servant leadership, what it means, you know, how it manifests, how leaders can really embrace it and the impact that it has. And really, and when it comes to that impact, not only in terms of how the people experiencing it are making them feel, but also the positive impact in terms of the organization, in terms of retaining people, engaging people, and keeping people motivated, but also lowering the cost of hiring people. So really interesting background. I said, you know, Kurt has just got that very, very specific skill of being the king of scaling businesses. And it's really worth listening to him when he talks about that and how he goes about that. Really appreciate you listening to this. If you are listening, please do give us a review on Spotify or iTunes, wherever you are listening to your podcasts, because that's how we get to more people. And that's the whole object of the exercise. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very interesting and very articulate Kurt Uhlir. Kurt, thanks very much indeed for joining us today on the Winning Teams podcast. It's a great honor to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
Now, listen, I'm looking forward to this. Your background is really interesting because you're kind of a serial entrepreneur, but in the sense of that, you're kind of a builder of businesses that have got to a certain stage, but you've also, you know, you've assembled teams across kind of 6 continents, which has got to be some sort of record. And you've also led an IPO of $880 million. But you've got the reputation of being the king of scaling businesses. So maybe you might explain to me how you actually got that and what that actually means in terms of scaling businesses.
Yeah, no, great question. So, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have entrepreneurial tendencies, and I have started companies from the beginning. For better or worse, I started 2 companies, legal entities, when I was 14 because the U.S. government was going to force me to pay so many taxes and payroll taxes. Yeah. But that very early stage can be very difficult for me. And so I had a mentor years ago that I joined his company. We had sold off that company to Oracle, and I kind of stupidly went and started a technology SaaS company myself and raised a bunch of money, invested a bunch of money, and came back to this mentor a couple of years later with a question that I did not ask before. And I was like, why is this just so mentally tiring for me? And he pointed out, he's like, when you came to work for me, I was one of the smallest companies you've ever worked for, and we had raised $30 million. Why would you think that you would enjoy doing something from 0 to 1? And he was like, I'd always been at companies that had a really good product market fit. And like we took from 85 million a year in revenue to 1.44 billion. That's a scaler. Is how do you look for the processes and or the changes to the team that need to be put in place to add lots of zeros to the back end of the revenue and EBITDA at the end of the day. And it was really Reggie pointing out to me something that I was struggling with and just could not see myself.
That's interesting. But what makes you so effective at scaling business? What is it? What are the skills, the knowledge, the expertise, the background, whatever it might be? Because that's a very specific skill. And it's not one that everybody has by any means. So why are you so good at it?
I was trained early on as a software architect and applied mathematician. And so I think that type of thinking that it takes to code software, especially architect systems, or think about math more than just like our basic kind of the approach that we would have, you know, in university. That's the same type of thinking that a trained lawyer has to go systematically through the hidden assumptions that so many of us struggle with on a daily basis that hold us back. And I say they hold us back because if it's a hidden assumption about your business, you have no idea what you should be testing, what you should be putting systems on in operations. And so I find a lot of people they kind of stumble into success when, if you can come in with that kind of software architect approach, you're able to very much test all the parts of the business and make sure that it's kind of stress tested for when the numbers increase.
And when you go in to actually do that scaling, what are the things that you see that businesses are missing that they could have done themselves to scale it? What are the things that you can see? Are there a number of things that you see that are common across different businesses?
Oh yeah, I mean, we kind of all joke about it. I mean, I think in a lot of your clients as well. I mean, even in large corporations, how often do you step in and see a CEO, COO, a vice president of some major division that's doing a bunch of work rather than actually overseeing the work and managing it and improving it? And now I'm a big believer in the best way to improve work is to do it yourself. I believe that I should be outworking everybody on my team on things down in the trenches, but that I'm doing it in a different way than just trying to get the work done. I'm looking at how our systems are in place, our processes in place, our thinking is in place in ways that could replicate across me and take maybe a 12-person customer success team to a 1,200-person customer success team. And even though it might take years or decades to grow to that level, and sometimes the business opportunity just takes that long to develop, when you start thinking about what would this look like if we had to have 1,200 people to support the customer growth, your 12-person team becomes so much more efficient. And so I tend to step in on that without any hidden biases. And I think there's just something about a way of having outside counsel kind of come in and go, let's walk through this together, and have people repeat back to you what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at your background, there are kind of lots of different areas that we could go into and kind of dive into. You go the marketing side, the digital side, all of that sort of stuff. But the one that I want to go into, which I know is kind of a sweet spot for you, is that you do say that adopting high achieving servant leadership is the best way to scale a business. And I really want to lean into that because servant leadership is a topic that is very close to my heart. But I'd like you to explain from your perspective, what is high achievement servant leadership and why is it the optimum way to do that?
Yeah, great question. So I think the easiest way is to do the comparison, because people come to servant leadership for a few different ways. And I like looking at the opposite of that coin. The opposite of that is the highly authoritative leader that comes in and says, this is exactly what you need to do, John. And at some level, there's a threat underneath. I'm going to give you the specific things to do. And if you don't do it my way, you're fired. And sometimes people put a nice veneer on top of that, but that's always the threat under there. The servant leadership takes a different approach and says, here's what we're trying to accomplish, the outcomes we want as a company or as a division or as the leader that you're reporting to, and says, here's what I think I need you to do. I'm going to walk you through and take the time to make sure you agree with our outcomes, understand why I want you to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to trust you to come back to me with ideas that could be different or better than my ideas to accomplish the outcomes that ultimately myself and our team wants. So that difference of approach between the authoritative, do what I say or else, that removes the ability for your team to really be smart. They only will bring up ideas where they feel safe, and even then they might bring up 1 to 10% of the ideas they will in a servant leadership approach. And if we're going to want to really grow this thing, whether from a sales, marketing, operations perspective, there's no leader that can truly get into all the pieces of the business and the company and manage them all. It takes everybody, especially the frontline team, being able to dig in and make those decisions themselves.
Obviously, I agree with everything that you said. I suppose my second question is that, that what you've said is perfectly logical. And I said I would absolutely agree with it. But why doesn't it happen all the time?
I mean, I look at myself, and so where I don't always lead from a servant leadership perspective, there's often a belief that I think I'm right, or I've done it this way and it's been successful before. And a lot of times leaders that are repeatedly successful, they tend to fall into servant leadership because they know they've been able to look back and realize there's a lot of times they weren't right. A lot of time people that were kind of that quick hit, that quick win, when they were really successful in their first company, their first leadership role, they believe that they're right. And the scary thing is until they have somebody else that walks alongside them as a mentor, what they don't want to hear, but what's true is being wrong and being right feels exactly the same until you realize that you're wrong. So I think about the cartoon with Wile E. Coyote chasing the Roadrunner. And at some point, the coyote's out over the cliff and he falls. Well, he thought he was right. Well, that's what being wrong about a decision that maybe your team actually knew was the wrong decision, but they were scared to bring it up. Well, if you sold your first company for $300 million, you're likely to step into every leadership role being like, damn it, I'm right, and you listen to me. When I might think the better approach is, I think I'm right. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me, and use my influence as opposed to just my authority to bring people into why this is the best approach to hit our OKRs.
But why do you think that people actually find that shift from, command and control, or even benign command and control, because there is a kind of a benign command and control which is kind of less direct than command and control. Right. But why do people find it very, very difficult to make that shift? Because it's a mindset. Yeah. It's also in a sense people feel they're losing control. It's letting go. So are they the reasons, or are there other reasons that people won't make the shift?
Well, that's some of it. And you're right on the fear of losing control. What they don't realize is it's a facade. They're not in control anyway. The market's going to do what it's going to do. Your team may or may not actually do what they're going to do without that. And so you'd much rather have your team telling you they disagree with you than just disagreeing with you and doing things to undermine you until you find out later. There's this facade of control where if you actually want to be in control, having more information, having an organization that's more transparent where people feel free to bring up disagreements, you are actually much more in control then. But we're not trained to think that way, especially in over the last 50 years where we've gravitated from education where it used to be self-taught and directive to this is how you learn every little subject, whether it's in the States or throughout Europe. We've changed from an education perspective, and we've changed leadership in a lot of ways. I mean, I like to look at a lot of times where whether or not you like conflict, if you look at successful militaries across the world, and you look at whether it's throughout Europe, you look at the United States, you will always have somebody on the battlefield that is ultimately in control and calling the shots. And what you will often find, whether it's a SEALs team or it's a colonel, you will find that their second in charge disagrees with them more than anybody else. And that's their job, is to make sure the leader is looking at alternatives and bringing up those things in a way that's respectful and works with the thing. But the difference in the militaries that get defeated and companies that get defeated is where the boss is the one that's always right under all circumstances.
Yeah, and doesn't listen. Based on your experience, I mean, you were talking about that you've assembled teams across 6 continents. Mm-hmm. Is servant leadership different, across all of those, or is there, irrespective of size and culture, is servant leadership the same? Is it different?
I think the desire for servant leadership and wanting to make sure that you're bringing people into the outcomes they're trying to accomplish, that's the same everywhere. How it's implemented is very different. I like to believe stereotypes exist for a reason, but every individual might be different. And so where I see that most clearly is there's an Eastern approach and a Western approach to innovation, coming up with new ideas. In the West, we tend to get together in a room, whether it's a whiteboard or however we're doing it, and we're going to throw out very different ideas to try to accomplish something. We're going to iterate it's going to look like this heartbeat that's just so drastic, and we're going to find our way very quickly to smaller iterations. In the Eastern side, what's different, and it's not the case for everybody, is there tends to be this much more, if you try to take that same approach to innovation, here's a different idea, John, that you use like say in America, and I take that to South Korea where I've worked a lot. That turns off the teams. It makes people quiet. They don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. What people tend to want to do is they want to iterate almost in a circle and a spiral into the center. We're still in both places. We may get to a vastly different and the same idea within the same amount of time, but are we going to go very polar ideas, or are we going to say, hey, John, that's a great idea, and I'm going to move you just a little bit to the left and a little bit to the left and a little bit to the left, and we're going to narrow in on the target. Same approach, or I say same thing we're trying to do, but a different approach. And I think you have to, one, consider cultural differences, but you also have to listen to your team. That approach I mentioned about, say, doing innovation in South Korea, I have had American-based teams that half of the team or more have that same exact version of how they want to iterate on ideas. And if you're not listening to them tell you what they need as individuals, you'll never allow them to flourish as the people they are.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't know if you've actually seen the recent Gallup figures, that the recent survey that they produced about your retention and engagement. But I mean, the figures are absolutely horrifying in terms of, the engagement and the quiet quitting, or even the not so quiet quitting, and that is going on. Why do you think that servant leadership is very much the antidote to that? Why is that actually going to shift that? Why is that going to build engagement? And why is that going to reduce the quiet quitting?
A great question. It brings purpose for the individual. And so it takes a little bit longer up front. You have to be very intentional with onboarding new employees. But that authoritative leadership, I hire somebody and I just put them in the role and tell them to do this job. The servant leadership approach points out the outcomes the company is going to accomplish, the purpose of why the company is trying to accomplish that, and then walks through with each individual, helping to understand their individual purpose and how that matches with the company's purpose. And so when there's that purpose, people don't just show up for a 9-to-5 job anymore. They have a need within them that they're trying to accomplish that maybe they're still trying to figure out, but they know that showing up to work and helping the company accomplish that is the best thing. From a quiet quitting perspective, gosh, I don't understand why some of these companies have such a hard time hiring. When I look back and go, I can almost always go to people in my team and they will bring people on past teams. And if I say, hey, I'm hiring these 3 roles, I will get applicants from those referrals. And when I go back and I ask people, why, John, did you take time to go email out to 20 people that I'm hiring for this role? And they go, because I've worked with you before. And I want people to work and live in that environment. There's a purpose between people. And when you treat people that way, they show up to work very differently. And you also then, not only do you not have quiet quitting, your retention improves and your churn goes down. Hiring costs go down as well because you have referrals like that, and you're able to accomplish things a lot faster.
Yeah. We talk about purpose there, Kurt, and I'm interested in when you talk about, I agree with you. One of the things that I find that it can be challenging for people to define their own purpose, right? I mean, people say, okay, well, I need to have a purpose, and say, okay, well, what is it? Right. And there's a little bit of kind of, well, I'm not quite sure. I can't really articulate that clearly. How do you help people actually crystallize and clarify their own purpose?
Sometimes it is just going through a process where people have to feel, especially work, they have to feel comfortable sharing their information, because a lot of time people's purpose, it's definitely not at work. It's not even for the community. It's their family. I'm wanting to provide for my family, or allow my kids to do this, or my wife to have this kind of life. And they need to feel safe enough to bring that up in a work setting. And a lot of work settings that isn't comfortable. But on the other hand, I think there's this thing, especially early on, at least in the States, where I find that people do say, well, you have to have your purpose. You should follow your purpose. And they're telling that to 14-year-olds, 24-year-olds, sometimes 34-year-olds. And there's this shame triggers that goes in there that's like, well, John, if you don't know your purpose, there's something wrong with you. And I think what we have to do a lot of times is say, it's okay to not know your purpose. And you walk through, it's helpful for the leader to walk through how I may have found my own purpose. But one of those things is to point out, hey, John, if you don't know your purpose, one of the best ways to find your purpose is helping somebody else or a small group of people accomplish their purposes. And very quickly you start to go, do I care about that or not? I have a dear friend that I completely outside of work, he takes him and his family, they take a large amount of money and they donate to medical research. I could not go to that person and force them in any way to donate to a weekend trip for a family that's suffering with cancer right now, because he actually just doesn't care about it. Not that he doesn't care about cancer, but in his mind, he wants to solve childhood cancer. So if he gives 10 grand for a family to have a respite and go to a beach, while he sees that some people's purpose, he's like, I want to solve childhood cancer. So I want to donate my 10 grand to that. So he knows the harder he shows up to work, the more money him and his wife make, the more they're able to give for that specific subject. And whether you agree with where you donate, say for cancer research or respite, I love that he has that clarity of where he thinks his purpose is, and he got to it by actually working with people that he was asking them questions like, "Why do you show up to work?" And it had nothing to do with what the topics we just talked about. And he realized he didn't care about those other purposes. And then he did work with somebody at a ministry here in the US called Lighthouse that was doing these weekend retreats for families where the kid was suffering from cancer. And it was so clear to him. He goes, that just doesn't touch my heart. But he realized what did.
He did, yeah. Well, and that is phenomenal. One of the things that you talk about and you've written about is leaders kind of dealing with overwhelm. And how do you help leaders cope with that? Because it is a big issue. I mean, when you look in large, corporates globally, right, the rate of burnout, the level of stress is extraordinary. I think it's dangerously high. And how do you help the leaders that you come across to deal with that and cope with that?
Help them push back against the hustle muscle, or the hustle push that we have from so many entrepreneurs, so many people on TikTok. We've kind of been trained, I think, with social media that says like, hey, you just need to work more hours. You need to spend more time. And I mean, I completely believe with the same skill set, if I put in 60 hours a week or 70 hours a week and you put in 30, I'm going to get more accomplished. But that also, like, how long is that actually possible to keep going? And so some of us can work 60, 70 hours a week. And what we don't realize is we need to think much more like an athlete. You never go out and run a marathon every day. You don't go out and play, a soccer game at a championship level every single day. You have ebbs and flows to your training and you plan for that. As so, I help people realize if you want to be successful at work, you have to take intentional rest. And it's not that you're slacking off. That's part of the equation for us as humans, that we need time. And similar to that is that back to the servant leadership bit. When I'm trying to be that authoritative leader, what it also means is I'm trying to micromanage and manage everything. So as opposed to my teams tend to run on Trello or Asana, as opposed to me coming in and working with those leaders for their individual Trello boards and overseeing that and giving coaching on that and doing some work myself, what that authoritative leader does is they almost have to know where all 1,500 Trello cards at any one point are, and they're micromanaging all of it. And I mean, they're burning out because they're trying to do things that they should not only shift to their team, they should train their team to be the people they've hired to do.
What keeps you going?
The desire to help people. From a work perspective, do I have to work? I could probably not work for much of my life, but I know that I have changed so much from a work perspective, from a personal perspective, response with my wife, how I interact with her, because of people I've worked with before, some negative, some positive. And I believe that the best way to help others is to come alongside them and help them see that we can build companies better and stronger than other ways.
Kurt, I love the philosophy that you have, and I love the approach that you have, and I love the way you kind of reflect and work alongside people in terms of really helping them to understand servant leadership and to kind of really manifest that in how they work on a day-to-day basis. Before we wrap up, and you can tell people where they can get in touch with you, 2 questions I ask everyone. One is a book that you have read, or maybe you are reading, that's had a significant effect and impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
Cheryl Backholder's book, Dare to Serve. It's actually probably the only real book on servant leadership that approaches it not from a faith perspective or a moral perspective, and just from if you want to build a company and make money, this is the best leadership style.
Okay, interesting one. Yeah, I haven't read it. I've heard of it, but that's obviously one to get. Good for it. Second question is daily rituals. Do you have them? What are they, and how do they actually support you and help you perform?
Yeah, I have two rituals I try to do every day. I'm not always like perfect on them, but I try to look more at streaks. How many days can I match up together with these? And so the first is I take a quiet time with God every day, and it's different than I think a lot of people do. Like they need to read a devotional or they need to read the Bible, and that nothing's wrong with that. I truly try to take just quiet time just to center and refocus because almost everything in my life is knowledge based. And so my mind is moving it all the time. And that's very different than just trying to be quiet and meditate on something that's different than me. The second thing is it sounds weird, but I have this ritual where I sometimes look in the mirror, sometimes I'll just do it in the car, where I'm asking myself, what am I fundamentally wrong about in my business? And I do the same thing for my personal life every day. Because as we talked about, like we never make decisions in our business. We never make a marketing or strategy or product plan believing that we're wrong. And so, but we always come up with things throughout our careers where we go, oh my gosh, that was the wrong decision. And so I literally have a process in place every day. And I try doing it with my team as well, trying to get them to say, what could we be wrong about today? Just to be humble to those other opinions.
I love that. I haven't come across that before, and I love that. Kurt, it's been a great honor to have you. Where can people get in touch with you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, my personal website at kurtuhlir.com is the best place. It's the hub for finding me anywhere on social media. Of course, I'm on all the major channels, but I do a lot of writing about high achieving servant leadership there and would love to get questions or feedback from people because if you ask a question that I don't have covered, I will almost for sure write an article about it.
Brilliant. Kurt, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been a real honor to have you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, John.